All his life, Pablo Escobar was impossible to catch. The Americans knew this for a fact, and so did the Colombians. How on earth was he caught so easily after evading authorities for more than a decade? Most importantly, who betrayed the king of cocaine? In this video, I will use testimonies from the son of Escobar himself to point out inconsistencies surrounding Escobar's terrible death, and you'll come to learn the man behind the biggest betrayal of the 20th century. The official account.
As you know, the official version of what happened is that Pablo Escobar was shot by the police while trying to escape.
Well, we have more than one official version. If you ask the North Americans, they will tell you we were the ones who killed Pablo Escobar. And if you ask the Colombian police, they will tell you we were the ones.
Till today, everyone claims they killed Pablo Escobar, and that can make it pretty difficult to trust the government's official account of Pablo's death. However, there is some truth to be found in that official account. According to the government, on the 3rd of December of 1993, a $100 million 6-month hunt for the painfully evasive Escobar came to a glorious conclusion when they discovered where he was hiding, the barrio home of his auntie in Medellin, his hometown and the same town where he had begun his coke career. This part is true, but it begs us to ask a very important question. How did they track him? According to them, Pablo had made a call to his son. Authorities had tapped and traced that call, and within an hour of that call being made, Pablo was involved in a deadly shootout with members of Los Pepes and the Colombian army. But there is a problem with this account. If you know anything about Pablo Escobar, you know it's practically impossible to believe that Pablo would have made a call from his hometown, or any call for that matter. He hated phones, and he had used phones in the past to trace and kill his own enemies.
He always teach me not to use the telephone because he was dead. That's his own words. Don't use telephone because he's dead.
Also, at the time, the whole of Medellin was under heavy surveillance. And yet, according to the official account, Escobar not only made a phone call, he also said his name and requested to speak to his son, and then had a lengthy conversation with him. As difficult as it is to believe, it turns out this part of the official account is true. Pablo did make that call. But then we're left with yet another question. Why? Why would he make a call that had almost a 100% chance of leading to his capture? Early days with his father. Understanding why Pablo made the call to his son requires having a firm understanding of the relationship he shared with his family. The media tries to paint Escobar as a loving, attentive father who did all he could to shield his family from the horrors of the drug trade. While it is true that Pablo might have been a loving father, he didn't hide his lifestyle from his family.
I know both because he was my father, but also he was a bandit. And when I was 7 years old, he told me, look, I am a bandit, that's what I do for a living.
In March 1976, when Pablo was just 27, he met 15-year-old Maria Victoria Henao. They fell in love and eloped to start a life together. They ended up having 2 children, a boy they named Juan Pablo, now known as Sebastián Marroquín, and a girl named Manuela. Escobar might have had many lovers outside his marriage, but he only had one wife, and he only recognized the kids she had for him. So in his own twisted way, he loved them. He loved them enough that he poured his soul into whatever family time he could squeeze out for his son.
Conocer a Disney siempre es un sueño de cualquier ser humano. El papá se volvía un niño en ese parque con Sebas. Se subía a todas las montañas rusas así, se muriera de pánico porque no le gustaban las montañas rusas, pero igual todo lo que fuera posible para ver a Seba feliz.
He was especially fond of Juan Pablo. Right from the start, Juan Pablo Escobar had a privileged childhood. In the 70s, he grew up in a magnificent mansion with large buildings, a go-kart racing track, a private zoo with hippos and elephants, huge swimming pools, a fleet of exotic cars and helicopters, and hundreds of maids and guards at his beck and call. However, under this somewhat magical setting was a looming feeling of danger and death. Because from that same house, Pablo ran the Medellin cartel, which supplied 80% of the world's cocaine. From that same house, Juan's father, Pablo Escobar, would give assassination orders, plan drug routes, plant car bombs, and wreak violence in Colombia. And when Juan was old enough, he tried to change his father.
When I saw the bombs in the news, I told him, look, what's going on? You don't have to do this. You should not do this. A lot of innocent people is dying. And he told me, he answered me, look, I didn't invent this. They used this against my family, my beloved ones.
But Pablo wasn't going to change, even if he was willing to hear his son out. On the other side of the fence, Pablo was very intentional about his parenting. According to Juan, when he was just 8, his father called him into a room, and his old man had laid out all the drugs that were available in the house on a table. He began teaching his son the effects of using the drugs, while discouraging him from using them. From then on, everything went smoothly for the Escobar family, until Pablo Escobar himself made a terrible error. While hunting down a government official, Escobar blew up a plane with 110 innocent passengers. Unfortunately for him, 2 Americans were also on board, and this gave the American government an excuse to intervene in Escobar's capture, a period of extreme danger. The US used every means possible to hunt down Pablo Escobar. They sponsored a Colombian-run paramilitary group called Search Block. They worked with a group of anti-Escobar vigilantes and colluded with rival cartels. Eventually, Pablo Escobar gave in and agreed to retire to a private prison called La Catedral, while his wife, son, and daughter had to move between hideouts, never staying in one place for more than a few days and living in constant fear that they would wake up with a gun pointed at their faces. Pablo even taught them how to kill themselves to avoid capture and torture. He instructed them to shoot themselves in the right ear. The walls were closing in on Pablo, but he couldn't afford to allow the same to happen to his family. However, this devotion to his family was about to be stretched to its limit. Every day Pablo spent in La Catedral, he lost allies. Most died fighting for him, and the ones who survived handed themselves over to the authorities. They believed the war was already lost. You could say they betrayed Pablo, but nothing they did or said could have led to Escobar's capture, because the government already knew where he was. They were just too scared to try to take him, because even in captivity, Pablo was still very powerful. Powerful enough to order hits on 2 of his men, powerful enough to simply walk away from La Catedral when the Colombian government decided to extradite him to the US. However, he was still losing ground, and his family was in serious danger. A little over a year before his demise, Pablo hid his family in La Casa Azul, a hideout he had built in the past. Pablo knew he had to make a choice quickly. You would be right to say he was at an existential crossroads. Juan Pablo would recall his last physical moment with his father. "My father took us to La Casa Azul as a way to say goodbye without knowing it. We even saw him cry for the first time. Then, Pablo Escobar promised his family, 'Wherever you go and wherever you are safe, I will find you. I will take a boat and find you.' After Pablo left, his family tried to escape to the US, but Search Block blocked their travel plans. Then they tried Germany, but they were also denied. Ultimately, they were forced to lodge in a hotel in downtown Bogota, where they could be killed at any moment. Pablo was aware of this. He was also aware that no one really wanted his family. What they wanted was him. But they also wouldn't hesitate to kill his family to get him, if that was the cost. The traitor is revealed.
And I hang up, but he was kept calling, and that's why I understood that he was willing to get killed.
Pablo Escobar planned his death, at least according to his own son, Sebastián Marroquín, as well as other family members. As his family nervously sat in the hotel room, as news reporters swarmed the hotel lobby, and as the police patrolled the streets below, no one expected that Pablo, of all people, would call his family. It was an error, a foolish move. The phones were tapped. Juan knew it, and he told his father not to call in an attempt to protect him. But Pablo called back every time his son dropped the call, until he had called 6 times. At this point, the Search Block and Los Pepes had triangulated his location. He was in Medellin, of all places, in his auntie's house, and he had been there for some days, having spent his birthday with his aunt and El Limon, his bodyguard. Now that the government knew where he was, you would expect him to run. No, not Pablo. Instead of running, the man sat and waited, and when he stood, he went to an open window where an undercover member of Search Block spotted him. Of course, he knew he would be spotted. He wanted to be spotted. You see, Pablo had 2 choices in that moment before his death. He could betray his family and live, or betray himself, giving his family a second chance at life. Running up to the barrio rooftops of Medellin with El Limon, his personal bodyguard, it was certain that he would meet his death. He probably knew this. There are no recordings of his death, only pictures, and the location of his gunshot wounds. According to official reports, Pablo Escobar was found dead with a bullet wound through his right ear, the same method of suicide he had taught his son and wife in order to avoid torture and capture. So, if you are still wondering who betrayed Pablo Escobar, you have your answer. It was Pablo Escobar. Only Pablo could have ever betrayed Pablo. Only Escobar could have ever killed Escobar.